That's one way to clear out a battlefield that arrived a few thousand years late. Captain Guerra's voice reverberated across the bridge as the crew of the glorious Shield gazed at the tactical display. They were expecting to come across a pirate stronghold, but instead they discovered something unbelievable. Scanners detected the wreckage of a battleship, debris floating aimlessly, and the strangest part was that there was not a single active pirate ship left. The destruction appeared ancient, according to the human signals, and Lieutenant Feth confirmed, squinting at his console. Jas drummed the armrest with his fingers. I believe that the myths about ancient humans were designed to frighten youngsters. They were, Feth whispered, and as of right now, every sentient species in the cosmos are aware of the legends. At one point, humans had expanded over the stars, establishing empires with their unmatched military might, but they eventually disappeared. The captain shifted uneasily in his seat. The glorious Shield was a warship designed for conquest and control, but something about this felt wrong. They weren't dealing with some unknown faction rising from the shadows. Rather, they were standing on the brink of a historical nightmare come to life. Gone without a trace, leaving only whispers behind, stories of their terrifying strength, unmatched resilience, and ability to turn the tide of any war they touched. Through the communications array, a pulse was received. When he looked anxiously at the display from the surface of that planet of human origin, Feth tightened the incoming communication. He then commanded the static-filled screen to clear, displaying a picture of a male human. There was something more fierce in his gaze than the pirates they had been after. You have entered a forbidden zone. His features were harsh, his demeanor was composed but menacing, and his armor was unlike anything else in the galaxy, old but effective, intended for combat, not for show. The person said, "You have 10 minutes to withdraw." His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it that unnerved the crew. Captain Jas arched an eyebrow and said, "Pardon me. We are a Union Command military vessel entrusted with securing this sector. Please identify yourself or face immediate action." "Who does he think he is?" Yora snapped. "Doesn't he realize we are the strongest force in this system, sir?" The human's eyes narrowed, but his demeanor remained the same. "You have 10 minutes, the gearbox cut." Feth hesitated before speaking. "I am able to identify power signatures." Surfing quickly on the surface, "How many of them are there?" Feth swallowed, saying, "Sir, too many times." Ancient human combat machines suddenly sprang to life as hundreds or thousands of signals illuminated the tactical display like a celebration. The Earth itself appeared to throb with electricity as if welcome its long-lost defenders as armor vehicles and dreadnoughts rose from under the planet's surface, long asleep but suddenly reawakened. Jas gaped in shock, wondering how it was possible that no race in the galaxy could build an army so swiftly. Only humans still had such might. The captain leaned forward to ready all of the weapons. Feth muttered, "No matter how outdated their technology is, we won't back down, Sir Feth. You must see this." The realization struck Jas like a cold wave as he looked at the display. The ships floating in the debris around the planet weren't just pirate vessels, they were Union ships, and hundreds of them had destroyed entire fleets before they could even call for assistance. These warriors had already effectively destroyed their enemies, and the communications crackled again. 9 minutes, they were reminded by the voice. With his fists clenched, Jones prepared the boarding parties for a surprise if they believe they can scare us with ancient antiquities. Feth didn't seem persuaded. "Sir, with all due respect, we've already undervalued them. If these people are really from that age, we should consider this seriously. They were warriors from a time long believed extinct when humanity ruled with unchallenged force before disappearing as suddenly as they had appeared. Now, they were back, seemingly ready to reclaim their place in the galaxy." Another. For a brief moment, it appeared as though a solid hit had directly struck several of the towering figures, but when the smoke cleared, the machines were still standing and their armor had only been lightly scratched. One of them raised its arm slowly and deliberately, as if it had just noticed the ship, and its eyes, if it had any, glowed dimly. Feth questioned in a shaky voice. The world came to life as a blinding beam of energy shot from the machine's arm so quickly and precisely that the ship's shields hardly had time to react. The impact rocked the entire ship, sending crew members flying from their stations. Jordan stared at the screen while his gut twisted, the machine pointing directly at the glorious shield. "Report on damage." As the spacecraft shook fiercely, Jazz yelled while clutching the armrest. When shields were down to 30%, one of the policemen cried out that he was having trouble staying balanced. "We've underestimated these machines, sir. They're not using standard weapons. Instead, they're tapping into something else." Ancient Eurus gritted his teeth and pulled us back, regrouping with the fleet before they could move. "That hit almost killed us in one shot." His hands trembled as he scanned the readings. Feth yelled over the confusion. "We can't take another hit like that. If we stay in range, they'll tear us apart fine." Another beam struck the ship, sending sparks flying across the bridge. The lights flickered and alarms sounded as the glorious shield listed to the side, its engines straining to stay online. As the glorious shield veered away from the planet, the ship's cannons continued to fire, but the ancient human warriors didn't even flinch. Their war machines absorbed the hits like they were swatting away insects, and their counterattacks were precise and devastating. According to the tactical display, more human soldiers emerged from the surface, their numbers increasing with every second. Drones recorded footage of underground bunkers opening, revealing rows of soldiers, each stepping out with the same calm, measured movements. 5 minutes later, Jordan was shocked to see that the humans were taking their time, not hurrying or scurrying to protect themselves, as if the conclusion had already been determined. "What are they waiting for?" he whispered to himself. "They're waiting for us to make a mistake," Feth said, looking at him with a pale face. Another beam flicked off the shields, sending another shudder through the hull, causing the ship to rock once more. Jazz realized they were dealing with something that was far beyond their comprehension, and he could feel the weight of it all bearing down on him. These soldiers weren't merely relics from a bygone era. They had learned the art of war long before the Union was even a thing, and now they were back and prepared to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. However, Juris wasn't about to give up and ordered his voice to be steady until 4 minutes had passed. The human's voice was calm, cold, and completely uninterested, and it reverberated through the comm once more, a countdown that no one on the glorious shield could ignore. Captain Jorais clenched his fists as the ship shook under another blow. "Captain, the shields won't hold Feth any longer." Sparks flew from broken consoles, and the smell of burning circuitry filled the bridge. Feth yelled, his face going pale. "Another direct hit, and we're finished." His mind racing, he looked around the battlefield, and the human war machines below showed no signs of slowing down. They weren't just defending their territory, they were methodically dismantling the Union's forces. Every shot from the glorious shield was absorbed or deflected with almost contemptuous ease. Meanwhile, the human forces were now moving forward with a terrifying inevitability, and were outmatched. "No, we're Union Command. We don't run from relics. If we do, we'll be leaving the entire sector at their mercy. We can't let them spread." Jas smashed his fist into the armrest. Feth interrupted, hardly raising his voice above a whisper. "They're not even pursuing us. They don't need to. We're the ones who are temporarily caught in their trap." When Eurus faltered, his instinct told him to never give up, but the reality was that the humans had outwitted him from the beginning. This wasn't only a struggle, it was an execution. After 3 minutes, the human voice reverberated. Just the cold, exact countdown, without any threats or taunting. As he glanced around the bridge and saw the fear in his crew's eyes, Jas's thoughts raced. Could they hold off long enough for reinforcements to arrive? The answer was obvious. No reinforcements would arrive in time, and no one else had survived long enough to call for help. Captain Feth urged them to leave while they could. Joyce swallowed his pride and fully retreated, activating the emergency jump protocols. The crew moved swiftly. As the engines roared to life, straining to pull the ship away from the planet's deadly embrace, fingers flew across the consoles as they prepared to break free of the gravity well and make a blind jump out of the system. It was risky, but it was their only chance. However, just as the jump drives started to charge, the tactical display flared red. More energy signatures. Hundreds. No, thousands. What now? "More human forces," said Sir Fath in a voice. "They've been waiting in orbit, and now that we're encircled," Hollow's blood froze as he saw how serious their predicament was. Humans had been planning for this for a long time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to show themselves, and now that the Union's fleet was damaged and there was no escape route left, they were closing in for the kill. This wasn't simply a planetary defense. After 2 minutes, the spacecraft shook as another round of gunfire struck their shields, and the voice came again. "We won't make it," Captain Fath murmured softly as the hull moaned under the strain and warning lights flashed around the bridge. "They've got us." Jas turned to face his crew. Even as he said it, he knew it was a futile hope the humans had already won. They were just performing the last act. He had led men through innumerable battles, soldiers who had trusted him to lead them to victory, but this was different, beyond anything they had faced before. The ancient humans weren't just stronger, they were smarter, more prepared, and now they were finishing what they had started centuries ago. He took a deep breath, and Jas called out his voice steadily, "Despite the chaos, prepare for evacuation despite the ship. Maybe, just maybe, some of us will make it out." Without showing any emotion, the voice said, "1 minute," as the evacuation sirens went off and the crew hurried to the escape pods. As the human soldiers surrounded the war robots from all sides, Yoris stayed at his station and watched the tactical spectacle. The spacecraft in orbit were preparing for the last attack, sir. "You must reach an escape pod." Below, the gunfire had ceased as if they realized the conflict was already done. When Fath pushed, Jas shook his head and said, "You go," in a calm voice. "This is where I'm staying." After a brief pause, Fath nodded to Kurt and ran towards the closest pod. The captain watched him go and returned his focus to the screen after 10 seconds. When the last transmission came through, it wasn't the icy voice of the human warrior, but rather something older and more potent, a message broadcast throughout the entire system in every language of the galaxy that we were returning. Yora grinned grimly, assuming that these weren't just his stories. Captain Yoris closed his eyes, feeling the pressure and heat build as the end approached quickly. The ship trembled violently as the first wave of energy blast tore through its hull explosions, rocking the glorious shield and turning the screens black. The ancient human warriors had returned and were reclaiming their galaxy. Warning came through 8 minutes ago, and the crew felt the tension rise as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. They had the advantage in numbers, but something gnawed at them. How had an entire fleet been destroyed without raising alarms? The captain scoffed, thinking that they had been gone for millennia, but the Unas lingered. How could these people, who had been neglected for so long, have been so prepared? Yora stood and spoke across the bridge, saying, "We faced worse before. They're not invincible, and neither are their machines," but he couldn't help but feel that something was seriously wrong and that this wouldn't be a battle like any they had fought before. Fath, who was still keeping an eye on the signals, said, "It's not just machines. There are hundreds of living species down there that I can sense." Soldiers who are human. Jordan inquired as to how many times the lieutenant hesitated. "More than we could manage." For a brief moment, the captain's will faltered, but he quickly recovered. "They have given us a countdown." The timer clicked off something inside, but let's show them what modern combat looks like. They weren't prepared for this, Jas said. They understood that this wasn't the galaxy and that the warriors weren't the human species they had anticipated. 7 minutes. The human warrior's voice reverberated through the communications in a low, steady tone. There was no fear or feeling of urgency. Instead, it seemed as if they had already won and that the countdown was more of a politeness than a warning. When the drone shot out from the hangar bay and descended towards the planet below, their feeds flickered to life on the main display, giving the crew a clear view of the ground. Captain Eurus stood in the middle of the bridge, his jaw clenched, and he said, "I want eyes on the surface. Let's see what these relics look like up close." The war machines were humanoid in shape, towering over the landscape with their joints whirring with an unnatural grace. Some of them carried weapons that looked more like siege cannons strapped to their arms, while others bore blades so large they seemed to defy reason, cutting through the wreckage of pirate ships with casual ease. Finally, there were the soldiers, who appeared to be tall and stoic, moving across the surface armored in thick plates of metal that seemed both ancient and impossibly advanced. Despite being fully armored and broad-shouldered, they had a distinct movement style that made even the most elite Union soldiers seem inexperienced. It was evident even from the overhead perspective that they were carrying out a task with composure, deliberateness, and methodicalness rather than fighting for their lives. Jairus' fists clenched. How many of them are there? At least a few hundred streams were examined by Feth as his fingers flew over the panel, but there may be more. There are energy traces wherever I look, some of which are underground and may have been dormant for decades. The idea of an army waiting beneath the surface, biding their time until the right moment, was unsettling, said Joris under his breath. He had always believed that the stories about the ancient human warriors were inflated scare tactics used to maintain order in the galaxy, but after witnessing them in action, it became evident that they were not myths but rather realities. Half an hour the voice reappeared, slicing like a dagger through the tension. "We won't wait around for their order," Jas said, slamming his fist on the armrest. Sir Feth started to object, but the captain interrupted him to stop him from targeting the biggest machines and fire. Rapid pulses from the ship's main guns streaked through the atmosphere towards the human battle while the glorious shield hummed with power and its weaponry locked onto the enemies below.